Imagine for a second that you're trying to solve this incredibly complex jigsaw puzzle.
Oh, I hate those.
Right. But just, picture it. You've got all the pieces spread out all over the table, and it is just not coming together.
Hmm.
So you ask a friend for help,
Sure.
and they sit down, and they start just like aggressively jamming pieces together, telling you exactly where things should go. But after a few minutes of just mounting frustration, you realize something.
Let me guess. They're looking at a completely different picture on the box.
Exactly. You're both trying to solve the puzzle, but your blueprints for what the final picture should even look like they're fundamentally mismatched.
Right, like one person is building a landscape and the other is building a portrait, and neither of you realizes the discrepancy.
Yeah. And that invisible mismatch, that feeling of someone genuinely trying to help you but completely missing the picture you're working from, that is exactly what happens when psychological counseling completely ignores cultural differences.
It really is.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at what happens when the very blueprint of human psychology gets, well, rewritten by culture, and how the mental health field is basically being forced to abandon its rigid, one-size-fits-all approach to truly see the individual sitting in the chair.
And it's a massive shift. I mean, in the field of psychology, this multicultural counseling we're talking about today, the sources actually call it the fourth force.
The fourth force.
Yeah, following the historical waves of psychoanalysis, behaviorism, and humanism. So we're looking at a fundamental evolution in how professionals understand human behavior, distress, and healing.
Because historically, the entire industry functioned like a giant mass-produced T-shirt, right?
Yes, that is a great way to put it, actually.
Like, it technically covers everyone who puts it on, but it only actually fits a very specific demographic comfortably. Everyone else is either drowning in the fabric or feeling completely choked by a collar.
Yeah, exactly.
And real quick, before we really get into the fabric of this, just a note for you listening. The concepts we're unpacking today, they touch on some major sociological dynamics. Things like race, privilege, systemic discrimination.
Right, heavy topics.
Definitely. And our goal here isn't to endorse specific political viewpoints, but to just impartially break down the concepts in the source material. We want to understand how these dynamics are currently being utilized by professionals to bridge those massive communication gaps in the counseling room.
Absolutely. And to understand how professionals bridge those gaps, we kind of first have to redefine what we even mean by culture.
Right, because it's way bigger than just geography.
Oh, totally. Or just the language you speak at home. I mean, if you look at the demographic data from the text, like the 2014 U.S. stats, it showed whites at 62%, Hispanics at 17%, blacks at 13%, and the projections for 2060 show that landscape shifting dramatically.
The country is diversifying fast.
Very fast. But culture isn't just your ethnicity. That's the key here. It includes ethnographic variables like religion, demographic variables, so age, gender, and status variables like your social and educational background, even your affiliations.
Like the structure of your informal memberships, right?
Sure.
Your culture dictates your values, your assumptions, how you perceive the world. And a lot of times it's on an entirely unconscious level.
Exactly. Which leads us to this foundational debate in the mental health field. It's the tension between the enetic and emic perspectives.
Okay, lay those out for us.
So etic, that's E-T-I-C.
Got it.
The enic perspective assumes there are universal principles that apply to everyone. It's the idea that a good counseling technique is just a good technique, regardless of who is in the room.
Like a baseline similarity between all humans.
Yeah, the shared need for trust, empathy, positive change. Now, on the flip side, you have the emic perspective. E-M-I-C. This one assumes that counseling approaches must be culturally specific. It argues that you cannot separate the individual from their cultural context. So techniques have to be adapted to fit the specific worldview of that client.
Okay, wait, let me push back on that for a second, because
Yeah.
that honestly sounds a bit like a trap.
How so?
Well, if I use the emic approach and focus purely on your cultural differences, aren't I just stereotyping you based on your group? Like, if I assume you need a totally different therapy just because of your background, how is that any different from just profiling someone?
It's a very real danger, and well-meaning professionals actually fall into that trap all the time.
Really?
Oh, yeah. In an attempt to be, culturally sensitive, a counselor might read a list of traits about a specific demographic, walk into the room, and completely flatten this complex human being into a two-dimensional stereotype.
Oh, yikes.
Right. The reality of true multiculturalism is incredibly messy. The text advocates for balancing both. You have to recognize those universal human traits while simultaneously respecting the unique, multifaceted cultural context the client brings.
So it's not about putting people in boxes.
No, not at all. It's about understanding the specific lens through which they view that universal human experience.
But balancing those universal and specific traits has to be incredibly difficult in practice. So let's look at what happens when professionals get it wrong.
The blind spot.
Yeah, the blind spots. Because historically, counseling theories have this massive geographic and cultural bias built right into their foundation, don't they?
They really do. The dominant theories in psychology are almost entirely based on European and North American cultural values.
Like what, specifically?
Well, they rely heavily on the scientific method, the idea of rugged individualism, the classic work ethic.
Okay.
They assume this shared belief in solving problems through a very linear, rational process. Think about something like cognitive restructuring.
Exactly.
It's the practice of identifying and changing negative thought patterns to change your behavior.
Oh, right, right.
And that works beautifully if you come from a culture that believes the individual mind has ultimate control over its destiny.
Which is like the psychological equivalent of the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality.
But if a client doesn't share those individualistic values, the counselor might misinterpret their behavior completely. And this introduces a concept from the chapter called over-culturalization.
Over-culturalization. Okay, let's unpack this. What does that mean?
It's a major stumbling block. It's the mistake of looking at a client's reactions to external factors like poverty or regional traditions or systemic discrimination and diagnosing those reactions as a permanent cultural pattern or a core personality trait.
Okay, I think I have a daily life analogy for this. It's like diagnosing someone as hating the outdoors when, in reality, they just can't afford a winter coat.
Yes, that is exactly it.
You're looking at a situational struggle, a lack of resources, and you're pathologizing their context, like you're turning their environment to a medical symptom.
Exactly. And another profound difficulty they discuss is the impact of language barriers and racism, specifically microaggressions.
Right, the subtle stuff.
Yeah, these are subtle, often unconscious actions or comments that invalidate a minority individual's experience. It's death by 1,000 cuts rather than one overt attack.
When if a counselor doesn't understand the psychological weight of those daily invalidations, they can't effectively help the client navigate them.
Exactly. They miss the whole context.
We actually have some really incredible case studies from the text to illustrate these exact blind spots. Yeah. Let's dive into the story of what was called Mary and the Mayflower.
Oh, this is a fascinating one. So Mary is a counselor deeply proud of her New England heritage. Like her ancestors literally came over on the Mayflower.
Wow.
Yeah, and her family has made noteworthy contributions to society. So her entire identity, her self-worth, is subtly tied to being this helper from an established, respected background.
Right. And then Mary gets a Hispanic client, Maria.
Yes.
And Maria has a thick accent, and she takes immense vocal pride in her own culture, which Mary kind of perceives as foreign.
Which is where the friction starts.
Yeah, because something strange happens. Mary finds herself getting highly competitive. She gets noticeably upset during the sessions. She feels like Maria's pride is somehow an affront to her own Mayflower background.
She gets caught in this psychological battle over whose culture is better.
Right. But why does that happen?
Because Maria's pride threatened Mary's internal hierarchy. Mary's unexamined bias, her own invisible emic perspective, prevented her from just sitting with Maria and understanding her reality.
So the session just derailed entirely because the counselor couldn't recognize her own puzzle box.
Exactly. And then there's another case in the chapter, Katie's Knowledge, which highlights a completely different kind of blind spot.
Right, the limits of intellectualizing empathy.
Right. So Katie was this razor-sharp counselor. Her mind was a machine. She could size up and solve a task instantly. But she relied purely on her formidable intellectual skills, assuming her brain power alone would translate into helping her minority clients.
She assumed she grasped the client's reality just because she understood the sociology of it intellectually.
Precisely. She knew the statistics, she read the literature, but she failed to connect with the client culturally.
And the client felt completely unseen, I imagine.
Totally. They sensed that Katie was treating them like a math problem rather than a real person. Intellect just cannot replace cultural empathy.
Okay, so we see the blind spots. We see how Mary's unexamined bias and Katie's intellectual detachment can just shatter the connection.
Yeah.
So how do professionals actually shift the paradigm? Like moving away from a rigid table of contents where we just list off demographic traits. Let's look at the actual underlying psychological tensions.
Well, we have to start with the massive divide between individualism and collectivism.
Yeah.
If we look at European Americans who often blend into this macro white culture, the heavy focus is on individualism. And the concept of white privilege is discussed here as a societal advantage based on skin color.
Like an unearned asset in a system built by and for that same macro culture.
Exactly. And traditional therapies, like the cognitive restructuring we mentioned earlier, they actually work quite well here because they were built on these exact cultural foundations. The goal is self-actualization.
Right, the individual.
Right.
But if we shift the lens to Black and African American clients, focusing purely on individual autonomy, it kind of misses the mark entirely, doesn't it?
It does. A counselor has to be actively aware of those microaggressions we discussed. But more importantly, they have to recognize the historical and ongoing importance of the church, the family, and the community.
As vital sources of emotional sustenance.
Yes. If a counselor tries to isolate the individual from that community to quote-unquote solve the problem, they are stripping away the client's greatest therapeutic resource.
Wow. And that tension between the individual and the collective, that becomes even more pronounced when working with Hispanic and Latino populations, right?
Absolutely. The sources outline specific core values that dictate the social rhythm there. You have familismo, which places family loyalty far above individual desire.
Okay.
Respeto, which dictates a specific deference to elders. Personalismo, which values personal relationships over formal rules. And confianza, which is this deep, earned trust.
Which means the actual mechanics of a therapy session have to completely change.
Mm-hmm.
Like if a counselor walks in, clipboard in hand, ready to hit a 45-minute clinical timeline and just immediately asks probing questions about childhood trauma.
They've already lost.
Right, they haven't established confianza.
Exactly. To build that trust, a counselor might need to spend the first 20 minutes of a session just sharing a cup of coffee, talking about their own family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they have to establish personalism before they can attempt any real clinical intervention. The process of building the relationship matters just as much as the therapeutic technique itself.
That's fascinating. And this friction over what is valued, the individual versus the group, it completely dictates how we define success. Which brings us to the Asian American experience and the incredibly damaging nature of the model minority myth.
Yeah, the model minority myth is this stereotype that Asian Americans are universally hardworking, financially successful, and completely free of mental health struggles.
Which is just not true.
It's profoundly damaging. It glosses over very real psychological problems and systemic discrimination. It silences people who are struggling because society tells them, well, they shouldn't be.
Right, and it masks this deep cultural tension regarding communication and family harmony. Because in many Asian cultures, there's a high priority placed on community cohesion over individual rebellion.
And communication can be highly indirect.
Which brings us to another case study. Colin considers the collective.
Oh, Colin, yeah.
So Colin is a counselor and a former star athlete. He is totally accustomed to individual merit. To him, maturity means stepping out on your own, proving your own worth against the odds.
It's the ultimate Western ideal. Becoming an adult means achieving independence.
But then Colin gets an Asian client, and this client defines maturity as honoring their family. Colin is completely baffled. He cannot fathom why his client won't just stand up for themselves against their family's wishes.
Right. Colin thinks growing up means breaking away, like a bird leaving the nest.
Right. That is his definition of success.
Yeah.
But the client sees growing up as taking responsibility for the nest.
Exactly.
So here's where it gets really interesting. I have to ask, how does a counselor bridge a gap when the very definition of a healthy, mature adult is the complete opposite of their own?
The counselor literally has to dismantle their own goals for the client. You can't force the client into your bird leaving the nest metaphor. You have to work within their framework.
Okay.
The therapy can't be about teaching the client to abandon their family obligations to find happiness. It must be about asking, how can you best support your family while maintaining your own mental health boundaries? You adapt the therapy to their definition of success.
You completely flip the script.
You have to.
And this tension over authority and communication styles, it extends to other groups as well, right? Like Native Americans. The text mentions there are over 500 recognized tribes.
517 recognized tribes, to be exact, so you really cannot generalize. But traditional talk therapy, sitting in a room, analyzing your feelings out loud for an hour, that can feel incredibly unnatural.
What works better?
Alternative approaches often prove much more effective. Things like integrating creative arts, storytelling, and profoundly recognizing the therapeutic value of silence and acceptance.
Silence. That's interesting because in Western therapy, silence is often viewed as resistance, right? Like a barrier you have to break through.
Exactly. But in many Native American traditions, silence is a form of respect. It's acceptance. A counselor who rushes to fill the silence is aggressively talking over the client's internal process.
They're jamming the puzzle pieces together again.
Exactly. And similarly, working with Arab American populations, which is a fast-growing demographic that requires navigating strong patriarchal structures, family honor, and a deep aversion to shame.
The friction there has to be huge because a counselor trained in the West might instinctively want to, empower an individual to break free from a strict family structure.
But if they position themselves as a rescuer,
They become an immediate threat to the family honor.
yes, they will lose the client entirely because they fail to respect the hierarchy. It's like you're learning a completely different emotional language for every person who walks through the door.
And this isn't just an American challenge, is it? We focused a lot on the U.S., but as the sources point out, therapy is no longer just a Western export.
Not at all. It is colliding with entirely different societal structures in real time on a global stage. The growth of international counseling is explosive. There were over 40 international associations by 2016 alone.
Wow. But there have to be serious growing pains with that.
Oh, incredible friction. Because some countries try to import the Western blueprint directly. Japan, for instance, has modeled parts of its counseling system after the US and England.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. If you take a hyper-individualistic Western therapy model and drop it into a culture that has valued collectivism and indirect communication for centuries, sparks are going to fly. The puzzle pieces do not fit.
And we see this tension play out vividly with international students studying in the U.S. too, right?
Absolutely. These students often experience crisis-level stress in their first 6 months. I mean, they're navigating a new academic system, a foreign language, and a cultural landscape that operates on a completely different set of rules.
So how do counselors help them?
Counselors working with these students often have to just abandon deep psychoanalysis entirely and focus on highly practical skills. They have to teach assertive communication.
Like how to look a professor in the eye and demand clarity.
Right, or how to navigate the bureaucracy of the American educational system.
Okay, wait. Pushback time again.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for international students? If a counselor is teaching a student from a collectivist background to be aggressive and assertive, are we just trying to Americanize them? Like, are we just erasing their culture?
That is the ultimate tightrope walk of multicultural counseling. But the goal is never to erase someone's cultural identity.
Okay.
The goal is to equip them to function effectively in their current reality. Teaching assertive communication to an international student isn't about making them more American. It's about giving them a mechanism to advocate for their needs in a system that unfortunately demands volume.
So it's a survival tool.
Exactly. It is a necessary survival tool for the environment they are currently in. You are giving them the flexibility to survive.
So you're adding a tool to their toolbox. You aren't forcing them to throw away the old tools.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
So synthesizing all of this, the core takeaways from the text are incredibly clear. Whether you're a professional counselor or just a person navigating a diverse world, effective connection requires intense self-awareness.
You have to know what your own biases are.
Right. You have to recognize your own puzzle box. You have to avoid the trap of overculturalization. Remember the winter coat analogy? Don't mistake a situational struggle for a cultural trait.
Yeah.
And above all, you need the flexibility to tailor your communication style to fit someone else's worldview.
It requires moving from an assumed universal standard to a place of genuine curiosity. You have to be willing to ask, how does this person experience the world? Rather than demanding, how should this person experience the world?
And this matters profoundly for all of us. You might not be a therapist diagnosing a client.
Yeah.
But you are constantly interacting with coworkers, friends, and neighbors.
Every single day.
Right. And every single one of them carries their own invisible cultural blueprint, their own structure of informal memberships and unconscious values. They're operating on rules they didn't even know they learned.
And recognizing those dynamics, it fundamentally changes how you process conflict. When a coworker reacts strangely or a friend pulls away, you stop assuming they're just being difficult. And you start wondering if there is a cultural mistranslation happening right beneath the surface.
Which brings us back to that jigsaw puzzle. We started by imagining how frustrating it is when someone tries to help you build a puzzle using the wrong picture on the box. We spent this whole time analyzing the counselor's lens and the client's lens. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Okay.
Think about your own personal emic perspective for a moment. Think about your daily life. How many times today will you judge someone else's actions? A frustrated coworker, a quiet neighbor, a stranger in traffic, simply because you are grading them on a cultural rubric, a puzzle box picture that they've never even seen.
It fundamentally changes how you view every interaction.
It really does. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.